Thank you for joining us on the What Can You Do Right Now weekly workshop, where we are helping you get relevant, practical information that you can apply in your business today. Last week, we talked about running a sellable business, even if you don't want to sell, kind of big picture of that. As business owners, we tend to get to a point where we're so critical in our business that we can't even always go on vacation or take the weekends off, let alone feel relaxed when we do. That is something we are internally working on so that I can do that. And also, it is a lot of work, but I see the end result definitely being worth that. So if you missed last week's workshop on just kind of the big picture pieces of that, we'd be happy to share it with you. We're going to be doing a series over the next 3 weeks, starting with today, on each of those big picture pieces. So today we have Phil Chun, who is going to be talking about the operations and people development, and he is doing that for Accrew. So we're excited to have him on our crew. Phil's worked in management, in HR, in project management, and operational development in a variety of different industries and organizations. He's currently helping clients build out their operational infrastructure and enable them to create clarity, to create efficiency, and maybe just be able to go on vacation. So with that, I am going to kick it over to Phil.
Thanks, Ann. I appreciate it. Well, it's nice to meet you all over Zoom. Yeah, I'm excited to share a little bit about some best practices that I think will help with your company, especially in these times where it feels like maybe for some of you, your companies might be crashing down or just on fire. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is to be able to go on vacation. But it seems like Adam is already on that. So maybe Adam will lead us in how we can best do that. But that being said, I wanted to share with you all some best practices in regards to how to operate in the now and also plan for the future. And so some of the best practices that I'll be sharing, that's a slideshow of maybe how you might feel right now that your company is going to crash down over you and all around you. So hopefully by the end of this, you won't feel that way. So some of the best practices that I'm going to be sharing about is, one, having a plan to guide your company, and then also having your employees have plans so that you understand as an owner where everything is at, what the progress is like, if there's going to be any fires that you'll need to put out ahead of time and proactively. Secondly, he's going to be creating avenues for feedback so that you can keep track of your plan and better understand really where your company is at as the market shifts or as the economy changes. And then lastly, investing in your low-level managers who most typically are on the ground really executing the plan. So let's go right into the first one, which the question is, what is the plan? And this is the question that you should be asking yourself and also your employees. And so to begin with that, I highly recommend modeling the behavior first by creating your own high-level long-term plan. Now, I know especially in these times when there's a lot of uncertainty, you most are likely to look at the now. What can we fix now and how can we make sure that everything is okay? But I also recommend looking at the 5, 10, 50-year plan. And when you create that plan, making sure that you write out the benchmarks. For example, if Accrew wants to be the best bookkeeping firm with the largest market share in Orange County in 5 years, what are some of those benchmarks? Well, in the first year, it could be hiring a sales team. In the second year, it can be growing your client list by 300%, and so on and so forth. And then once you write out that long-term plan, making sure that you can put it in a place where your people can see it and reference it, especially your leaders in your high management position, so that they can understand what their buy-in is, what their roles are, and if the plan is going well or if it isn't. Kind of with that, and in some ways, more importantly, is asking your employees, what is the plan? So part of doing this well is shaping the behavior so that your employees are thinking through their strategies and bringing you information. I know that oftentimes when I've gone on vacation, it really is a working vacation, which means that you're working in Hawaii, but not really a vacation. And part of the anxiety I think that comes from that is wanting to make sure that things are progressing, that if there's going to be any fires that you know of it in advance, or that there's some sort of alarm or trigger system to let you know what is going to happen and what's going on. And part of being able to do that well is making sure that your employees are pushing information up towards you. And a large part of that is having them write the plan. So some examples of Where this might come into play is, for example, if you have your sales lead and they have a great idea, a new strategy that they want to try, your first response might be, great, what's the plan and where is it? Where can we see that plan? Is it written out? And that way, as they're explaining the plan to you, as they're writing the plan, some of the buy-in begins to happen as they think through the steps necessary and the checkpoints that you might need to come across, or that they will come across to ensure that if it's working and if it's not, and if it isn't, where they can adjust. And so as they write out the plan, you want to make sure that it's documented. It's somewhere where everyone can find it so that everyone can reference it. So as you ask, what is the plan? There's going to be some keys to success in doing this well. The first is visibility. Part of what happens when you write a plan is you want to be able to find it. I know as owners, when you go on vacation, sometimes you have to spend hours and hours digging through emails to try and figure out where progress is and what's going on. But some of doing this well in terms of visibility is putting it and consolidating it all into one visible place where everyone can follow along based on where they're at. And the second key to success is allowing for conflict and consensus. So a good plan, I think, is really shaped well when you can ask clarifying questions. Okay, what happens if this happens? What is the cause and effect? And so ensuring that you create an environment of conflict and consensus to really encourage the team to think through what our best practice is and what the best plan might be is very helpful in terms of succeeding in this area. Some of the immediate impacts that you'll see once you start asking what the plan is buy-in. Like I said, as your employees begin to understand that everything is going to need a written out plan, they're going to start thinking through those steps. And inevitably, because we're prideful people and we want to do well, we're going to think deeply about those steps and make sure that our proposal is one that is going to be accepted as best as possible. The second thing that's going to happen is you will inevitably create a culture of feedback. When something is presented or a plan that needs to be thought through, there's going to be a conversation, some sort of conflict or consensus, some sort of thinking through of, is this a good plan and what can be expected out of it? And lastly, the immediate impact is accountability. Your employees now have skin in the game when you ask them to write the plan. They need to think through it. This is their plan. And so now they want to make sure that it runs well. Another best practice is going to be collecting data. So data is your best friend. One of the worst things that can happen, especially as a project manager, is when you spend all this money on creating this or purchasing this new project management tool, training everybody on it, making sure everybody is good, and then 2 months later you realize nobody is using it. That's never a good sign. And so to better understand where your company is at, you want to create as many avenues of feedback as possible. Some of the avenues that I would recommend is email. A dedicated email that might say something like feedback@accrew.com or HR@accrew.com, where people can specifically send an email or any kind of feedback that they may have in regards to a topic that might be happening or a project that is currently in progress. Another way you can do it is a dedicated phone line. And so I know that I've come from the restaurant industry where English isn't a lot of employees' first language, and also access to technology or Wi-Fi can be limited. And so it's easier for some employees to just call in, leave a message on the answering machine to give feedback. And lastly, it's using something like a Google form or SurveyMonkey, where employees can, or any kind of participant can give input. And sometimes Google Forms are helpful because it's anonymous, and some people feel more comfortable giving anonymous feedback. And that is a good tool that can help you receive some of the feedback that you might need in terms of true and honest feedback of how something is going on. So some keys to success in regards to collecting data is having multiple avenues. You want to make sure that you cast a wide of a net as possible to ensure that you are gathering as much data as possible and as often as possible. Secondly, it's communicating the why. Why are we doing this? Oftentimes when employees see a survey, they want to know what the data is going to be used for, what's the benefit for them, and really why it's happening. What is the company measuring? And so something that you want to communicate effectively and well is that, for the most part, feedback is important to you, that your company cannot run well without everybody's input, and everybody is important in regards to that. And then lastly, it's rewarding people for it. This can come in many different forms. One of them could be a thank you email. So sometimes they're automated. If an employee submits a form, it could be an instant email thanking them for giving you feedback and that it's important. Or if this feedback form is going to be used for customers, it could be something as simple as like a discount code on your website if you're selling goods. So the immediate impact of this is data and feedback to help you understand, is it working? Is this something we should continue doing? And is the plan on track? The next thing I want to encourage is investing in your entry-level managers. So you may have heard the saying that your best salesperson is not your best manager. And that is oftentimes true. Just because somebody's good at selling doesn't mean that they're good at managing everyone who is going to also sell that product. And so one way you can invest in your entry-level managers is something called a weekly focus. This is something that can be done. You can choose a day of what works best for you. But for example, you might want to do it every Monday, where your managers have to fill out a list of weekly focus of short-term goals that they're going to be working on that week. And that is a list that is going to be reviewed together with that employee with the senior level manager. Now, this is going to bring a couple things to you. It's going to bring visibility. You're going to be able to see very quickly the things that your employees think are important. How do they prioritize? Are they productive? And also, are they accomplishing the tasks that they set out? Some of the keys to success in this one is follow through. This is a really big one, especially when you start this kind of project. People often forget to do it. It's not a part of the behavior. It takes some time. And so as an owner or a leader, you want to remind them, you want to show them that it is important to you. Some of the immediate impact that you will see in doing this is, like I've said, visibility. Are your employees busy? With what? What are they spending all their time doing? Are they productive? What do they consider a priority? Another thing it's going to do is create an easy place for instant feedback. It creates an objective place for two people to come together and really assess if something is a good idea or not, or if their plan is a good plan. The other thing that it can do is it can actually be a marketable development program. It's something that you can advertise to managers that you're recruiting, to express to them that you have a development system in place, something that is scalable, something that is continuous, and something that can be measured in regards to developing your employees at every level. Something that I want to note here is that I always encourage you to express and show your employees that you are willing to do the directive that you are giving them. Model the behavior. So if you're going to ask your team to do a weekly focus, maybe you also do a weekly focus, or you have your executive team start off by doing the weekly focus and showing the rest of your leaders what it looks like. In all of this, I highly want to recommend some tools that can help. Typically, project management tools are very helpful, like Asana or Trello or Rike or whatever it may be, because these tools can have some built-in AIs that will proactively notify you in the status of task, how things are going, and if things are blocked or bottlenecked. So a quick recap on some things that you can do to move forward. Write a plan and get your employees used to writing plans. Create multiple avenues of feedback so that you can begin amassing that data that you need, and invest in your low-level managers by having them create a weekly focus. My hope is that in doing some of these three things, you don't feel like you're putting out fires all the time or that your company is going to come crashing down. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. So first up, I want to open it up if other people have questions. I knew I was going to get to that slide at some point. If you guys have questions, just kind of give me a wave. Otherwise, we'll check the chat, and if not, I've got lots of questions. Oh, actually, oh, go
just
for
kidding.
it, Phil.
No. Okay, I'll do it. So you mentioned like focusing on entry-level management kind of development. What kinds of things do you recommend for like mid-management or upper management development to kind of support some of these operational systems?
Yeah, I would highly recommend in the beginning the weekly focus. The weekly focus is a really easy one to kind of prototype feedback and culture, have the manager go through it themselves, and that way they can experience, okay, what does it feel like to receive feedback, so that they know better in turn how to give it when it's their turn to do so. I think the weekly focus is a really easy and a good starting point to do that.
Awesome. And then we had a question in the chat. So Phil, you talked about having a culture of feedback and setting up a place to be able to do that. But how do you start to develop the trust to be able to give that feedback if that's not something you've done before?
Yeah, I think a large part of doing this well is rewarding the behavior. So inevitably, it'll always be slow. There's going to be skepticism of how the information is going to be used. Are some probably cultural and social implications within the company that may affect it going well. But I think a big part of this, the success of creating culture feedback, is rewarding those who do it, and then also modeling it as best as you can. And by modeling it, I mean not only giving feedback, but asking for feedback. Yeah, I would highly recommend sticking with it.
Love it. Caitlin has a question.
What are some positive ways you recommend holding your team accountable for things?
Yeah, I think in terms of accountability, a lot of times some of the things that can go wrong or can be difficult is when emotions come into play. And I think one of the easiest ways to keep people accountable is starting with the plan. It can be much more objective when people are not meeting checkpoints, and you can point to an objective point in the plan to show them, okay, you haven't met this deadline or you haven't met this checkpoint. Tell me what's going on. Why haven't you met it? How can I support you? And what are some reasons that it didn't happen? And so I think having the plan, having something that you can point back to is really important.
Awesome. And then in terms of those plans, you had mentioned about buy-in, and I love the idea of kind of involving people. What do you think the best way to start to get that buy-in and get that involvement is if you've never had written plans before?
Yeah, I think it begins with modeling it. So kind of showing everybody what a plan literally looks like. I think one of the easiest ways to do that is using a flow chart. So there are tools out there like Lucid Chart or even Microsoft Word, or there are Google tools that will help create those flow charts. Literally having a bubble pointing to another bubble, and creating those visual steps. I think that is really helpful to model what it looks like so that other people can follow and understand, okay, this is what it looks like to follow a plan. This is how we know checkpoints happen and what they look like.
Love it. I'm going to keep going if there aren't other questions, but I do want to open it up if you guys have any other ones for Phil. All right, I'm just going to keep going. So Phil, do you have a preference in those tools in terms of like workflow management?
Yeah, my two favorite tools are probably Trello and Wrike. I think they're very different tools. Trello is probably one of the easiest tools to use in terms of onboarding people who have never used a tool. It's kind of a drag and drop, plug and play type of tool. So I highly recommend Trello. Wrike is more of a robust tool in regards to when there are multiple departments or multiple people working on one project or one major goal. And so Wrike has the ability to give visibility based on departments or levels. For example, not everyone needs to see the entire scope of the project. Maybe you have people on the field who just need to be told, this is where you should go, this is what you need to do, and by when. And that's really all they need to be able to do, complete the task as finished, and then that information pushes up. So I highly recommend Trello or Wrike.
Love it. And then you touched on something that I feel like is really important in organizations, and I'd love your thoughts on it in terms of segmenting data that people have access to, that not everyone needs to have access to everything. Do you have any best practices on kind of who should know what in an organization?
Yeah, I I think a lot of that is going to be dependent on how you write out your major goals. Because once you do that, you can better determine who needs to be a part of it, who needs to know what the end goal is for certain major goals. And if you have minor goals or sub goals, who needs to be involved in regards to uh, having that conversation so that innovation happens. But it's true, not everybody needs to know what some of the steps might be. For example, maybe your IT team doesn't necessarily need to know that your client list, you want to grow your client list by 3x, but your sales team definitely needs to know the major goal. The people within that sales team needs to know. And so there is definitely a level of, sometimes there's too much information. For example, when I go to Albertsons, I'm paralyzed because there are so many cans of salsa. Whereas if you go to Trader Joe's, maybe there's only 4. And so there is that balance that you need to find between too much information and less.
I love it. For someone that's maybe in a smaller organization, say just a solopreneur, or maybe just has a very small team, how does these kinds of recommendations like scale down for them? Because maybe they don't have low-level managers, maybe they are the manager of all the things. How would you recommend that someone in a smaller org start to implement some of these ideas?
Yeah, I think when it comes to creating multiple avenues of feedback, that may not be necessarily a step that you need to take right away, especially if you have a culture in your team where maybe you're meeting often, or that feedback and those conversations are happening often. But I do feel like the steps of writing a plan and having your employees write a plan, as well as having the weekly focus, is really helpful, because then it continues to create a culture feedback and conversation, even if you are just operating as department heads.
Awesome. And then
I
Jill, you
have
had
a
a
question.
question.
Yeah, so I think everyone kind of has a preference with like project management tools. Like it's kind of maybe the first one you used or the first one you used in a particular role or industry or something. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. I have used Rike as a non-manager, like as someone who's being managed by other people, but I do not enjoy it. I just don't like it in that context. But I've heard that managers love it. And so I'm curious what you think about like the balance between usability for the actual team and like the actual metrics that the managers need to access. Like what are the best tools for that balance?
Yeah, I think project management tools are often difficult to decide on depending on what you need. But I do think part of the success of a project management tool is uh, using it often and really getting your team to buy in to use it. Because really, in terms of data and productivity, sometimes you don't see actual productivity until about 6 months to a year after you actually use the tool. Some of those tools do require some back-end building and reshaping the behavior so that data is flowing into the tool and also spitting out the data that you need. So I really do think as part of the success is being mindful that it does take time to use it well.
If only we had someone to help consult on what workflow management tool might be best for you, and an IT person to help support that afterwards, who both happen to be on this call. So if you guys need help with any of those things, we'd be happy to connect you. We did have one more question in the chat for you, Phil, is for those weekly focus meetings, do you have a format or a template that you typically recommend to make sure that those meetings are efficient?
Yeah, if you're using a project management tool already, I would highly recommend putting it into there. But if you're not, and if you have like a small team, I would actually recommend something as easy as using Google Sheets. It's just literally a place where people can write bullet points of what they're going to do, the date that they're proposing when they're going to do it and accomplish it. And then you can use those Google Sheets to notate together either progress or some clarifying questions you might have. So it doesn't have to be complex. It just has to be a place where people can reference back to.
So in terms of the weekly meeting, is that like that someone would put that together first on what their goals are for the week, and then you just have a meeting to quickly review those? Is that kind of what it looks like?
Yes, that's basically how I recommend doing it. Typically, what we did is by Monday morning, you as the employee had to have your weekly focus done. So we typically did it around by 10 a.m. And then around 10:30 a.m., if your manager is available or whatever time you schedule it to be, the manager would actually review the weekly focus without you first. So on their own, they would access the file, take a look at it, and then depending, it didn't always require an in-person meeting. So they could Slack you some clarifying questions, or if there was something that required a much deeper conversation, then that meeting was scheduled. For the most part, what we did in regards to the approval of the weekly focus is that we would just comment with a thumbs up. So the manager would comment with a thumbs up. That way, it was all good to go, and then you would proceed.
That's my favorite comment, by the way, in Slack. It's just thumbs up. Yes, exactly. Perfect. So it sounds like that weekly focus, it can be a meeting if it needs to, but it's more just an opportunity to plan what's a priority for the week and then get some review and feedback from your direct supervisor and have them provide some accountability so that before the week starts, not at the end of the week after the week is over and you're going, what did you even get done this week? Before the week starts, let's see what the priorities are. Let's pivot if we need to, and let's make sure that everyone has a touch point where they're accountable. Is that a good summary?
That's a great summary. You should have done this presentation. No, and I think kind of part of that is the goal of asking the question of what is the plan. Getting your employees to think like an owner. Okay, they need to have a plan. We need to be able to accomplish these things in a certain time. I need to be able to communicate to my supervisor or my investors when something is going to be done, and when if it isn't going to be done, why. How can we have an audit trail to see why something didn't get done?
I love the idea of trying to get your employees to think like an owner. I think that that's such a hard hurdle to jump over so often, but it can be such an impactful way of just shifting culture internally to be less dependent on a business owner. Like you can actually go on vacation when the rest of your team thinks a little bit more like a business owner. Are there recommendations of like the ways in which you would say, okay, these are the kinds of things they should be thinking like a business owner in, but maybe not these? Like maybe your team shouldn't think like a business owner when it comes to how much their time costs, but maybe they should when it comes to like sales revenue or something like that. Do you have recommendations on the kinds of things that are like on and off limits for that kind of thinking if you're not actually the business owner?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer in terms of a general answer, but I do think one of the really interesting things that as owners or high level managers that you'll see when your employees start to fill out their weekly focus is what they think is a priority. And that will give you a really good idea of, okay, are we aligned as a company? Does everyone understand what the goals are and what's a priority in regards to things that we need to accomplish now, things that we can put in the parking lot and try and do later, and things that maybe aren't even important at all. And so a lot of times when those weekly focuses are filled out and you don't necessarily need to give too much instruction on what's wrong and what's right. You might just literally give them the directive of, hey, fill out everything that you are planning to do this week and things that you need to do, things that are maybe reoccurring, and let's take a look at it together. And that will, I think, give a pretty good picture as to, in terms of, expressing to your employees of having an owner's mindset, things that they do have an owner's mindset about and the things that they don't.
I love it. I learn something every time I talk to Phil. Well, we are at time right now. So I did want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you would like to reach out and get some more information from Phil, or maybe talk operations, because he is all about that, here is his contact info. And then if you would like to reach out to me to chat about finance, I geek out about that too. So there is my contact info as well. Next week, we will have Melissa Mullet talking about the marketing aspect of running a sellable business, even if you don't want to sell it. So we hope you can join us next week. And thank you again, Phil, for sharing. That was delightful. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.